Thank you so much, and please accept my apologies for we've been having some connection issues here in Colombia. I was really concerned that I would not get on, but I'm here, and I'm glad to be here to be able to lend my voice to this tremendous tribute to an outstanding comrade, someone that clearly we all loved and respected, admired. You know, folks, it's sort of with a heavy heart, not just because of the loss, but the loss of so many comrades these last few years. And I was so looking forward to a new chapter in my personal relationship with Comrade Che in terms of some work that was being planned for South Africa. Right now, as of today, we have the Vice President of Colombia who is in South Africa, hosted by my partner, who is the newly appointed ambassador from Colombia to South Africa. And this is part of this connection that Che understood so clearly that we needed to make and cultivate, develop, and that is that connection of Latin America and the African continent, and specifically the closer ties of African people in these two regions. He was very much looking forward to assisting with that process, and it's really, I told my partner all about Che, even described his sort of deliberative sort of way in which he presented ideals. You hardly ever saw him get flustered. But that comes from a life of struggle, a life of having to deal with people in real human encounters where an understanding of differences is primary. We're going to miss Comrade Che. We are going to continue to uphold his memory and the work that he so championed, not just, of course, in South Africa, but globally. He understood the importance of the issue of peace and development. We remember the role he played in the gathering that Comrade Bauman and others organized in Ireland. We built the international coalition to eliminate U.S. and NATO bases. But in that gathering was just another example of the kind of contributions he made there and contributions he has made as part of his life of struggle and service. So it's with a heavy heart that we join, but it's also with a sense of dedication that we will remember and we will continue the work that he so championed to transform this world and to make it a place where we all can live in fundamental dignity. So we say long live Brother Che, long live struggle, long live the fight for revolutionary transformation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ajamu. Our next speaker will be Arnold August. Arnold is a Montreal-based author and journalist who has written several books on Cuba and Cuba-US relations, and won many awards for his journalism, both in North and South America, and Europe, and the Middle East. So, Arnold, please go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me in order to provide me with an opportunity to lend my voice with those of all the other distinguished panelists regarding Comrade Che. Comrade Che, as he's affectionately known by many in South Africa and abroad, among his lifelong attributes embodies a forever ongoing relationship forged in blood between Africa and Cuba. On November 5th, 1975, Cuba reached its decision to intervene in Angola and wage a war in alliance with the Angolan revolutionaries against the US-backed apartheid regime, known as Operation Carlota. On another such November 5th in 1843, as Colombian Garcia Marquez wrote, a slave in Cuba called Black Carlota, working on a plantation in the Matanzas region of Cuba, had taken up her machete at the head of a slave rebellion in which she lost her life. It was in homage to her that the Solidarity action in Angola bore her name, Operation Carlota. It was led by Fidel Castro, who knew all the details of the war. During the almost 16 years that Operation Carlota lasted, 337,000 Cuban soldiers and some 50,000 civilians collaborators carried out an international mission there, and 2,077 of these Cubans lost their lives in this struggle. The emblematic Battle of Cueto Cuanavali finally paved the way for the fall of the racist regime of the white minority in South Africa, which soon after was forced to legalize and start negotiations with the African National Congress and free its leader, Nelson Mandela, in February 1990. The segregationist laws would finally be repealed on June 17th, 1991, definitely abolishing the oppressive system of the South African people. Thus, Comrade Che and the organizations ANC, CPSA, and the people dramatically erupted on the African continent and the world scale from being downtrodden, viciously persecuted, and assassinated majority to partaking of political power in South Africa. This eternal debt that South Africa, and indeed all of Africa, owes to Cuba, even though Cuba never desired such praise, was paid back in many ways by Che himself. One of these ways he did so was his life and work of Comrade Che. Firstly, he fully participated in the new South African political power by making sure that the Cuban-Angolan heroic war legacy remains in power and further develops. Secondly, the South African-Cuban Solidarity Organization that he headed carried out valuable work in support of Cuba. Allow me to say one thing. His organization, Solidarity Organization, said Comrade Che will always be remembered as an outstanding intellectual revolutionary and internationalist for which he was admired and respected. He was particularly admired and respected by the people of Cuba for his consistent participation and leadership of South Africa and African-Cuban solidarity. Material aid. Yes, they also carried out a lot of work on material aid, but also very important on key political issues in the defense of Cuba. For example, the July 11th color revolution attempts by the US and its allies. They issued a very strong statement on that, saying the South Africa salutes the heroic people of Cuba and the Cuban Revolution that despite the genocidal blockade during all of these decades is able to guarantee universal access to high standards of free medical care, education, social security, sports, music, and culture, and also produce important vaccines to roll back the impact of the coronavirus. They continue, we express our unflinching solidarity with the Cuban Revolution, the Cuban Socialist State, and the people of Cuba. I just got a comment by for this panel today from Fernando Gonzalez, who's the head of the ECAP, the Cuba Friendship Association. He himself was also one of the many fighters in Angola. This is what their message is, which also applies to us here. Dear brothers and sisters of the South African Cuban Friendship Society, with deep consternation, we received the sad news of the physical disappearance of the great friend of Cuba, Chris Matlhako. To his family and friends, our most sincere condolences. I would just like to close just one last minute, and that is Comrade Che he was a communist right from the beginning of that struggle. And at a time today, in the context of the Russian special military opposition and the war there was an unprecedented political, cultural, ideological war against communism, against communists. But Comrade Che, he remained a communist right to the last second of his day. Thank you very much.
That was lovely, Arnold. Thank you very much for also reminding us of that aspect of his work. Our next speaker is Margaret Kimberley. Margaret, as you know, probably all very well know, is an executive editor and senior columnist at Black Agenda Report, and she currently hosts the Black Agenda Radio podcast. Margaret, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Radhika. Greetings, everyone, and thank you all for joining us as we pay tribute to Chris Che Matlhako, a comrade and friend. I first met him in 2018 at the first international conference against US NATO military bases, which was held in Dublin, Ireland. I chaired a panel on US Africa Command, AFRICOM, and Chris was a participant along with Paul Pumphrey and Anna Tambo. It was my first encounter and only in-person encounter with him, but it was very meaningful to me. It played an important role as I learned more and more about internationalism, especially as it pertains to Africa. This is a small portion of Chris's remarks for that panel. Quote, "There are US bases, compounds, port facilities, and fuel burners in 34 African countries, including in regional hegemons, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Algeria, under the guise of countering terrorism, and through joint partnerships, Washington has infiltrated continental security organizations and has touted the idea of establishing on-the-ground liaison offices. American military officials and policymakers view the continent as a full-scale battlefield in the competition against China and through promoting regionalism. US officials are successfully circumventing continental institutions, including the African Union," unquote. Some of that has changed, most obviously in the relationship with Ethiopia, but Chris was spot on in his analysis of what is happening on the African continent as a result of US interference and its imperialist imperatives there. It was a great pleasure meeting him and learning more about the activities of the South African Communist Party. And South Africa is a nation which threw off its racist apartheid system only to be captured by capitalist interests. This story is frankly rather tragic, one in which Cuba in particular played a huge role in freeing it from apartheid, but it nonetheless succumbed to international pressures. And we cannot remember Comrade Che Matlhako without acknowledging the work of the South African Communist Party and others who struggle to regain the liberation that comes through socialism. I'm also proud to be here on behalf of Black Agenda Report. We've been presenting news and analysis from a Black left perspective since 2006. It's very strange in this country, the US, that is so right-wing that the word left has lost a lot of its meaning, and conservative Democrats who are pro-war, pro-imperialist, and capitalist manage to call themselves the left. But at Black Agenda Report, we know that means socialist. And as such, we make clear our connections, that is to say that of the African diaspora and the absolute necessity of connecting with the socialist world and stating clearly that that is the solution of the plethora of problems faced by African people around the world. I also knew Comrade Che through my work with the Black Alliance for Peace. He was a member of our US Out of Africa Network Steering Committee, which is the formation which guides our anti-AFRICOM work. He was very committed in that regard as we managed a variety of nations and time zones to come together to discuss our work. The Black Alliance for Peace is, I think, the chief formation in the US and also very important internationally in mobilizing against the US Africa Command, AFRICOM, and all of the US military commands which attempt to exercise hegemony around the world. We USians are all very much underprivileged, a word most often used to describe low-income people, but it applies to us all unless we strive to learn more, because our country is so retrograde and works very hard to keep people here ignorant of the rest of the world and of the role of this state we live under in maintaining imperialist domination. That is doubly true of Black African people, that there is a sustained effort to keep us separated from and ignorant of the struggles of African people internationally. That is why it was so important for me to travel to Dublin or anywhere else where we engage in educational work. I was deeply saddened to hear of Comrade Che's passing. He was younger than I am, and had so much more to accomplish. But we're all here today in this meeting and around the world actively working to make real his hopes and dreams. And we are all dreamers, are we not? And we must be, in bringing true justice to South Africa and to people all over the world. Chris Che Matlhako, presente. Thank you very much.